It's been a little while, so I thought it was the perfect time to go back and look at some of your hot takes. So about 1 month ago, I put out my tendrils and asked people for hot takes, and like 150 people got back to us, and there was a lot to sift through, but we're back. We're going to look at more of these comments, 10 more to be precise, and all of these are coming from YouTube. I think next time I look at Reddit, but this time it's all from YouTube, and I'm going to burn through these, and it's going to be a fun time. But before we get into all of that, it's time for a little bit of shilling.
I am shocked. Shocked. Well, not that shocked.
Please consider leaving a like, a comment, and subscribing, as that helps me fight against that dastardly YouTube algorithmic demon. And if you want to help any more tangible way, then please consider signing up to my Patreon or my YouTube members, or using my Element Games affiliate link down below when buying some new Warcry gubbins. A huge shout out to my patrons and members who you can find on screen now. Badoosh. But with all of that out of the way, it's time to get on with the show.
And now for something completely different.
So comment 1 comes from Wild Dice co-host and the world's best bear, Filax, and he says, reading through these, I think the actual reason people complain about Bladeborn, allies, and blessings is because while the game of Warcry is fun, 90% of the factions are either bland and have no thematic gameplay, or they have a really good theme but are complete trash. So Bladeborn, allies, and blessings have to be used to make a team competitive or interesting. Nerfing or disincentivizing any of those three without tackling the actual problem is going to directly kill the game, or at least make it way less fun. And honestly, that is spot on. A lot of warbands in Warcry, specifically from 1st edition and the compendium, are really bland, and they don't do anything remotely interesting. They are just cool stat blocks with powerful abilities. There are some exceptions, especially now that some of the compendium factions have been rejigged and reworked, like Iron Jaws, like Skaven to a degree, and also warbands that have been added to the compendium, like the Ruination Chamber, are also pretty darn cool. But like you said, 90% of these factions are not all that interesting, and this really comes into play when you look at 1st edition Bespokes, who kind of all just have the same generic abilities and kind of look slightly different, and it's not all that interesting to play. And then you also have the fantastic themes but are complete trash. These are most 2nd edition Bespokes. Let's look at things like the Claws of Karanak, the Skirgan Trueblades, the Tyrantic Cohorts, the Pyregeists, right? These are all wonderfully themed warbands that just do not hit their stride with their gimmick. Where I don't necessarily agree is nerfing or disincentivizing any of these three without tackling the actual problem is going to kill the game and make it less fun. Potentially, yes, but also nerfing or disincentivizing the same thing over and over again. If you don't do that, then you are really leading towards stagnation, and stagnation will kill the game. Stagnation is not good for any game. And when people are taking the same things over and over and over again, regardless of list, this is especially the case in things like Chaos, where the same things are the best allies, and you will only ever see them. That already disincentivizes taking literally anything else. So I think there's a balance to be had, and it's whether or not Games Workshop want to go back in and rejig the older stuff and make them interesting again, or they're just interested in doing points, because that's really how Games Workshop tends to update their games. They tend to just rejig points and leave these big sweeping changes to things like FAQs, or if they've got some sort of model-based incentive, like Iron Jaws, they had a bunch of models they wanted to add in, so they added a whole bunch of new models in, and it was pretty cool. Fleshy Courts was the same. Skaven are kind of the same as well. So moving on, we have Wad Prime. The game's verticality doesn't go far enough, and the next edition should leverage this more, both in terms of terrain offerings and what individual fighters can do in regards to it. Absolutely. The only real warband that benefits from verticality is Corvus Cabal. And when there's 67 warbands in Warcry, not including Bladeborn, then you're looking at like 1 in 67 factions have any meaningful interaction with terrain, like in climbing it, right? There's very little reason to climb terrain unless you want to avoid mounted things and you want to just hide up there And like, sure, I guess nobody places objectives on platforms for the most part. They tend to place them on the battlefield floor. This indirectly makes things like ignoring vertical distance when moving a lot less meaningful in a faction, because you already ignore all 1-inch high terrain, and then you aren't necessarily wanting to climb anything unless you're trying to be sneaky, and you've got range stuff, but range stuff in Warcry is typically expensive or bad, with some key exceptions to that. So having some incentive to do that kind of makes sense. For me, the Corvus Cabal battle trait should kind of apply to most factions in some degree. Jumping down from something and having that gravitational momentum to power your strike should make you more powerful. You should deal more damage or have a higher strength when jumping off things and landing that big ass overhead swing, right? That should be a thing in the game at the very least. And then of course just make the Corvus Cabal one even better, because Corvus Cabal are awesome and Corvus Cabal should have everything. As a quick side note actually before I head off, because it just came to us now, being able to jump vertically up and clamber up things that you can reach from that vertical jump, right? Currently you can only climb or jump horizontally, or like down I guess, but you can't jump up. There's no actual verticality to your jumps ever. And this makes like things like overhead platforms really awkward to interact with a lot of times. And there's very little reason why someone just can't like jump up and clamber up from there. And I think that would actually be a really interesting way of improving mobility on battlefields with a lot of verticality. And it might actually encourage people to use vertical terrain, because you've removed or at least dampened the inefficiency of burning movement to climb things, right? Moving on to Dan B 1523, Bespokes need power upgrades and Bladeborn need nerfs. It feels like Warcry is just a Games Workshop tool to sell underworld warbands that don't move off the shelves. Also, remove the Bespokes rune marks if they don't increase the power levels. Imagine a Skirgan True Blades fielding Graveguard. So this is a take of two halves, and yes, Bespokes do need some power upgrades, and yes, some Bladeborn do need nerfs. Notably Vexmore being the huge elephant in that room. However, everything else I don't agree with. It feels like Warcry is just a tool to sell underworld warbands that haven't got the shelves. That's not really the case, because Games Workshop don't sell underworld warbands regularly. Their actual sales tactics for underworlds is to constantly cycle them out. And once you can't buy them, they're gone. And that's actually a detriment to Warcry and Bladeborn as a whole. It's one of the biggest downsides to Bladeborn, is that you have to go to third parties more often than not to actually get the cool models that you want to use Bladeborn. And also removing bespoke rune marks so they can like take Graveguard and stuff. Nah. Hard disagree. I would much rather see the actual themes and the mechanics work in tandem within the actual bespoke warband better. Make a Skirgan True Blades better. Don't remove what makes them unique by allowing them to take things within their Grand Alliance, like making a Skirgan True Blades just Soulblight Gravelords. Nah, man, I think that's just a net negative to just the thematic power of Warcry, and nah, I can't get behind that last bit, man. Not gonna lie. Jared hates. I hate you got a roll for a chance to use abilities. I rather it be like Kill Team, where every model has their own abilities they can use on their turn. I disagree with this, because I really like the ability system in Warcry. It adds a really interesting dynamic that you don't really get anywhere else, at least not to the same degree. Tying initiative to your abilities leads to really interesting decisions you have to make on the wild dice phase, especially if you are spending first, because you have to make that choice. Are you going to risk losing initiative by making more abilities and making your turn more powerful, having more things you can actually do, or are you going to secure initiative for that key alpha strike, right? And of course, banking wild dice has massive ramifications, as do wild dice generating abilities. For example, the From Red Crusher getting kills, Dark Old Savages is generating them out of nowhere. These are very powerful abilities and introduce a new way of interacting with the game, which is interacting with the ability dice phase, and removing it for the Kill Team equivalent, I think, is just a net negative to the Warcry play experience. But that's just me. Nico882, the wait action as it is currently implemented encourages gameplay that is counter to the central theme of Warcry, short and brutal skirmishes. Unfun to play with and against, and makes cheap fighters good for the wrong reasons. I'll stop there. I completely agree. Weight is such a painful action. It is such a painful action. It encourages passive gameplay, and when taken to the extreme, when you outnumber your opponent by enough, it basically turns into solitaire. And when you're playing a 2-player game, when you are now just playing a 1-player game, and you've got no real way of interacting meaningfully in a tactical space because someone is just waiting the whole game, as someone who has played with and against weight spam lists, I feel bad doing it, and my opponent feels bad when I do it. And that is just a negative experience to go into. And yes, there are ways around it. There are ways to play against it. But to me, that doesn't really excuse the disproportional power that weight has on the game and how much that buffs chaff. Large warbands already have the advantage of model activation, and the weight action functionally doubles that advantage. You don't need to weight spam. And frankly, if you were to go to the complete extreme and remove weight completely, right? If we just took out the weight action completely, it wouldn't have a massive effect on the game. And why is that? It's because these massive horde warbands who rely on weight to exacerbate their model advantage are doing fine into Iron Jaws. Iron Jaws punish them for waiting, so they don't wait, and it doesn't actually impact their gameplay all that much. They're still playing into these fine. We saw Off Meta Musings running a 15-man spider list into Iron Jaws and winning, and Iron Jaws should dominate that because they shut off one of the key strategies of a large warband, which is waiting. But he didn't wait, and he still had a massive activation advantage, and it just didn't matter. So in that extreme case of a horde warband against elite, you simply don't need it, and I think the game would actually be improved with a massive rework of the complete removal of weight. And sure, you might lose some tactical near ones, but I think people vastly overrate how much tactical near ones doing fuck all actually makes. Moving on to Ruben Callum 3350. Blessings are terrible and encourage the worst kind of min-maxing and add nothing in terms of flavor. I can't really disagree entirely. Blessings are kind of there, right? Like, it hasn't really made bad things better. It hasn't helped bad warbands make their bad stuff better. It's kind of a trap in that sense, but it has made the already good stuff so much better. And yeah, it doesn't add anything in terms of flavor, and it does encourage min-maxing, and min-maxing does often lead to the death of creativity, right? But I wouldn't necessarily remove it. I think it is just a harmless thing, and it does allow people to like fill in those little gaps in their points when you can't quite hit 1,000 points, especially once FAQs come in and things have been like dropped in price. Now you've got these massive like points discrepancies between lists. Blessings have a reason for that. That's it. Their intended reason is to fill in those little gaps. And sure, people may min-max it to the extreme sometimes. I wouldn't necessarily call them terrible, but they definitely have their issues. And of course, you are free to not use blessings. It is an optional rule for matched players. So if you don't like them in your play group, then just don't use them. End of one studio. You should be able to react after waiting on the second action. No. No. Phylax, reply to that. Yes. No. Still no. Absolutely not. Why? Just weight is already a disproportionately powerful action. I had a big old rant about it before. Weight is already a disproportionately powerful action. Why make that more powerful? Why give anybody the ability to do a free action after they've done fuck all for 2 actions? No, that's ridiculous. Get out of here. Not going to justify any more than that. That's a ridiculous take. Get out of here. In Phylax, you shouldn't be promoting this kind of nonsense. Fem Cactus 4630. Corvus Cabal would be better if you cut the damage strike talent for a Varangard. I don't like where this is going so far. I just don't. Costs less than 100 points more, so you only need to cut an 8 wound chaff model to include it, and it doesn't die instantly to 2 chaff models getting lucky with crits. And that's the only model you care about for the battle trait, since the leader is useless and the chaff don't care about strength. And the Varangard only needs a double to work and doesn't have to waste movement climbing to kill things, and it has a good triple if you want it, and at that point you should add Vexmore and just play Slave to Darkness. They have no place in the roster of anyone looking to win a tourney. You can win a tourney with them, but that comes down to a good pilot who would do better playing a better list. Man, that's a scathing critique. I fully disagree. This is all lies and slander. Corvus Cabal are a hard warband to play. Shrike Talons are very squishy. You are absolutely correct. But just saying drop the Corvus Cabal and just play Slave to Darkness with, like, you know, good stuff, I think is just such a narrow-minded perspective and doesn't actually do what the Corvus Cabal want to do on the battlefield. Firstly, all your guys are slower, so you aren't playing this speedy faction that Corvus Cabal want to do, and replacing Shrike Talons with Vanguard are not really an obvious change or a swap, because Shrike Talons are still cheaper and you can take an extra model, and there's value in having 2 models over 1, especially when the damage output between a Vanguard and a Shrike Talon is disgustingly similar, if not just straight up in the favour of the Shrike Talon. And the Shrike Talon's faster, right? You might look at the Vanguard and go, damn, that Vanguard's like movement 10. But the Shrike Talon's threat range is substantially longer. We are talking about a threat range of 16 inches versus 11. And you don't have to contend with mount, and you don't have to contend with awkward base sizing. And all of this does add up. And I am never for the idea that why take this when this exists. And sure, I can sometimes fall into my hyperbolic rants and go, why play Jade Obelisk? There's Flameseekers right there. They do the same thing. But calling myself out, that is a narrow-minded take that really doesn't help the game. And this is the same kind of thing. Why play Corvus Cabal when you can take Vexmore, Vanguard, and Slaves of Darkness Marauder Spam? Well, because I want to play Corvus Cabal for the cool bird ninjas, and they're actually really good right now. They play really well into a lot of lists that are used commonly at the minute. In addition, I know you mentioned this as well, that it's more pilot skill. I have won tournaments with the Corvus Cabal. It was really fun to play, and it was really dominant in that setting. And sure, it was a local tournament, so the power levels do vary, but there's definitely play in Corvus Cabal, and the Corvus Cabal slander is just not something I can ever get behind. No, I disagree wholeheartedly. AP Galleon says, if they're going to continue to use the strength versus toughness table, it needs to be expanded, i.e. use the 40k table or use the kill team's melee mechanics and keep ranged the way it is. I don't really agree. I think it's fine, honestly. I think the one dice system and having hits and whatever being tied to strength versus toughness is actually fine. It's quick and easy to pass at a glance, and yeah, I wouldn't really change it for an expanded version. And finally, 2Ferks946, allowing multiple allied fighters in a warband was a mistake that resulted in unthematic ass-backwards warband construction where you are incentivized to take the good stuff out of a given grand alliance and then figure out which set of warband abilities and chaff fighters best supports the good stuff heroes. Or an even more stern version, rather than a melting pot trash can of every model ever released for Age of Sigmar, the game would be much more fun and tighter both narratively and mechanically if they treated it like they treat Necromunda. One overarching theme and location and a limited cast of warbands tied to that, with clearly defined delineated themes in gameplay, which get seldom but steady expansions. They should have stayed with the original idea of the 8-point setting and somewhere between 6 and 10 unique Chaos warbands vying for power, with a laundry list of fun options and customization for each warband. Okay, this started as a really sort of like a damn, that's a harsh take, and then actually devolved into something that was kind of interesting. So we're going to take this in 2 parts. So firstly, it was a mistake to basically allow to take allies and all that good stuff. And it depends what you want in a game, right? If you're really into theme and having the narrative commingle with mechanics, then yeah, you are kind of looking at a game that is just a melting pot of bullshit where nothing makes sense, right? I'll even go one step further. It makes no sense that a Slann Star Mage or a Mega Boss would ever be in Warcry, right? These are leaders of armies. They are not small-time people who run around doing things in a warband scale. That's ludicrous. That's unthematic and ass backwards as well. So let's throw that in. I would actually agree there. I would say yes, Warcry in its current list building state is unthematic and does lead to ass-backwards warband construction, where you are incentivized to only take the good stuff out of Grand Alliance and then just take the cheap chaff, lol, right? Because cheap chaff is what you would need to build those lists. And yeah, it's a really formulaic way of playing Warcry, and it is incredibly popular in match play. It's also incredibly powerful, although not the only way to play match play. It is the most popular way of playing match play. If you are more thematically driven, this is a massive negative, despite the list building being largely seen as a positive because of the freedom of making the list what you want within the Bladeborn, the allies, the thralls, the monsters, whatever, right? There's a lot there to dive into, to dig through. It does come at the cost of narrative and thematic cohesion, and I like my themes. I like keeping things in faction where I can, because I like theme. I like things making sense. And if I do take allies, I at least try to justify why in some sort of narrative play. Unless I am going super competitive and I'm going to win tournaments, then fuck all that. I'm going to try and win a tournament with whatever I take. That's a different scenario. That's a different way of playing. So ultimately, whilst I do agree with the idea, surface levelly, I think actually once you dive into it more, and let's say we took out all allies. Let's say we scrapped all allies. We took out Bladeborn. We keep thralls are cool. We keep thralls. We keep, I guess, even monsters, right? Or make monsters more fun to play against, right? Whatever you want to do. Let's just say we do just stick to the bespoke stuff, right? You just have your cool thematic stuff. What then happens in a competitive scene is the exact same thing. You will still only see the good stuff, right? The best warbands would still appear. The warbands topping the event would be thematically appropriate, but disproportionately represented because they are just better than the other ones. And it doesn't fix balance. It's still just a case of, oh, cool, I'm taking the best stuff anyway, but now I don't have a way to actually change up my warband to try and fill in weaknesses, right? I don't have the list building freedom to try and fix that issue. So, you know, I kind of like, I do appreciate the sentiment. I just don't think I can really get behind it fully once you really start going past that surface level interpretation. Now, the second part, I am all for this, frankly. Yes, had Warcry went into a more limited way, had it been a bit more Necromundi in the fact that they just added 2 bespoke warbands over time with cool shit, it'd be awesome. That would be my ideal game. I love the themes of Necromunda. I love how Games Workshop treat that slow, steady expansion, right? I am absolutely all for that. And 10 warbands rocking that, some really cool ideas. Yes. All the way yes. Would Warcry be smaller? Probably, yeah. Like, a lot of Warcry players got in because of Age of Sigmar and its connections to Underworlds, all that good stuff. So yeah, Warcry would be a fundamentally different game. Its player base would be also completely different, and the player base would likely be a lot smaller. It would be pretty darn cool, and I'd be very interested in having a little peek at a timeline where this was Warcry. Like 10 warbands just slowly expanded. Give my Splitted Fang gladiators riding cool-ass snakes. Give my claws to Karanak, right? Give my claws to Karanak dudes riding the Hounds of Wrath. I am all for that too. It'll just be a cool time. But alas, that is not the timeline we live in. We live in this timeline. And for all the flaws that surround the idea of like optimizing the fun out of Warcry, which is just the case of any competitive game, sadly. And if you don't like how the list building in Warcry impacts the game and how it isn't thematic, then that's fine. You can play the game that way. You can arrange games with like-minded people and just play Warcry how you want to play. You don't necessarily have to play like everybody else. And frankly, there are plenty of Warcry warbands that don't need allies, that can operate completely in faction and do very, very well. And this does include the hyper-thematic bespoke warbands, if a little bit less so, but it can be done. But that's it. I think that was 10 takes I reacted to. As always, this was a lot of fun, and these were just me rattling off my top-of-the-dome ideas. Don't take them all that seriously. I could be completely wrong. The exception being Femme Cactus and the Corvus Cabal. Nah, man. objectively incorrect. There is no subjectivity there. They are objectively wrong. Corvus Cabala, awesome. Get that slander off my channel right now. But I guess that's the end of this video. Leave a like, a comment, and subscribe. Let me know in the comments down below what you think of these takes, what you think of my reaction. Drop some more takes. I'm all for them. But until next time, lads, ladies, and everybody in between and beyond, ta-ra.
Groovy.
Hey all, and welcome to the post-toast credits. A massive shouts out to my algorithmic demon slayers, Andy Morris, blah blah blah, the Head Knight of Paint, Heinz D, Long Run Hobbies, Lord Phylax, Maps, Sable Saber, Steph, Steve Bean, the Houston Toad, Tough Tootin' Baby, and Velas. A huge thank you for supporting the channel, and I will catch you all next time. Ta-ra.